Hello, can you all hear me okay? Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out with me for the last talk of the day. I really appreciate you all being here. I attended my first Monitorama last year and had an incredible time. And on the flight home, I felt really inspired and started brainstorming talk ideas. And I'm super excited to now be here this year as a speaker giving one of those talks that I brainstormed. So today we are going to be talking about how observability intersects with software engineering team culture. Before we jump in, I'll share just a little bit about me. My name is Brooke, and I am a software engineer at Honeycomb, which is an observability tool to help engineers understand what their code is actually doing out in production so they can solve bugs and outages more quickly and effectively. I've been at Honeycomb for just over a year now, and I work on the API and partnerships team. So I work on our external APIs, Terraform provider, and integrations with other tools in the developer ecosystem like PagerDuty and GitHub. Prior to joining Honeycomb, I worked for a Fortune 50 company where I worked on headless e-commerce websites and IoT, or Internet of Things. And I was actually a Honeycomb user at that job. And I got really interested and passionate about observability when working on IoT specifically, because there's a lot of complexity in orchestrating the firmware and the mobile apps and the cloud that really helped me to see the value of observability. During my time there, I worked in both IC roles and manager roles, and so I was able to experience firsthand how helpful observability tooling can be as an engineer trying to solve problems. But then also when I put on the manager hat, I could see the bigger picture of how it also made the team unit better. And when I'm not working, I really enjoy baking. Pies, cookies, and breads are my favorite things to make. So like I said, before I became a Honeycomb employee, I was a Honeycomb user. And everyone on my team at the time, and really the company overall, were pretty new to observability. So today I want to share a story based on that journey of observability adoption and how implementing an observability practice impacted the culture of the team. So we start with a team of 4 engineers. For the purposes of this talk, we'll just refer to them as the Avengers. The Avengers have been asked to build a connected device platform for their company. The goal of the platform is to store device data and keep mobile apps and firmware synced up with the most up-to-date data. The team thinks this sounds like really interesting work, and they accept the mission. They want to build a really strong platform and knock their deliverables out of the park. So the first thing they did was get together to talk about the standards and best practices they wanted to follow while building this platform to make it the best they could. They settled on the following standards. Code gets to prod in less than 15 minutes once it's committed against main. Around 70% or greater unit test coverage is recommended before merging a PR. End-to-end canary tests run on core code paths a few times per hour and proactively alert on errors. And team members merge small, frequent changes to keep diffs manageable. The Avengers were feeling pretty good about themselves after agreeing on this list. Most of them had worked on legacy systems before, where these things were either an afterthought or not included at all. They wanted to build a better system. Despite setting those standards and holding each other accountable to them, the more engineers that onboarded to the team, and the more features and complexity they added to the platform, things got more painful to operate and understand. When discussing that pain as a team, there were 2 main sticking points they felt they needed to resolve to hold true to that promise of building a better system and a better way of doing things than they had experienced in the past. And those were confidence in deploys and time to resolution. When the team had a retrospective to talk through the struggles they were having solving bugs as quickly as they wanted to and were expected to, there was a lot of discussion around their logging solution, which was sending unstructured log data to CloudWatch logs. it wasn't easy to correlate their log lines to a problem at hand, let alone correlate multiple logs across multiple Lambda functions to create a full picture of what might be going on. They were starting to feel that relying only on these logs to operate their platform to meet their own expectations and the expectations of other teams in the company building on top of their platform was not setting them up for success. A couple members of the team had been hearing about observability, and the benefits they'd heard about sounded like it might be able to help resolve their pain, but they still didn't really know what it meant to have observability or how to get started. So they set off to do some research on observability and what it would take to implement it. Despite hearing great things about observability and how important it was, they realized no one on the team could really define it. There are many different definitions of the word floating around, but this is the one that they ended up agreeing on. Observability is a measure of how well the internal states of a system can be inferred from knowledge of its external outputs. This definition helped the team rally around a goal for what they wanted to accomplish. They wanted to stop needing to push new code when they noticed something wasn't working in order to be able to get enough information to debug and troubleshoot. They wanted their system to consistently push out signals to let them know both what was succeeding and what was failing so that they could eventually get to a place where they could proactively solve problems instead of chasing bug reports. Once they had agreed on a definition and understood what they were aiming for, the Avengers tackled how to make their system observable. I mentioned earlier that they were sending unstructured data to CloudWatch logs. So one of the first things they realized was how important and foundational structuring that data was on their path to observability. On the left and the right, we see an example of the same log with all of the same information, but on the right, each value is associated with a key that will help with searchability and discoverability when we want to dig into a problem later on. All right, so the team has formed a really solid foundation by rallying around a common goal, and they've converted their unstructured log data to structured log data. They continue along on their journey by adding distributed tracing to their code. If you're new to tracing, this means that they started taking those structured logs or events that we just talked about and connecting all of the events that happen within a single request by a unique identifier called the trace ID. Each event in the trace is then referred to as a span and has all of the attributes the engineers think their future selves might care about when debugging. They did this starting with the most important service first, and then carved out dev cycles in each sprint to add traces to at least one more service until each service was fully instrumented. They invested in a tool to help with visualization and discoverability of the telemetry data they were generating. In this case, they chose Honeycomb. And this tool displayed their traces with multiple spans as a waterfall so they could see how the code was executed, how long each function call took, and the actual data associated with the function call in production. And most importantly, they added an ongoing practice of observability to their code review process and held each other accountable to answer the question, how can we observe this in prod before shipping new features? This is an example of what that waterfall view looked like once they had implemented tracing. So this entire waterfall is the trace, and then each node within that waterfall is a span. And every span is associated with one of those structured logs the team focused on emitting from their function calls. And when a span is clicked on, we'll see all of the structured data associated with it. So if they wanted to know the exact device type or device ID being provisioned, or which user ID might be having trouble provisioning their device, it's right there at their fingertips. Over the next month or two, their confidence in deploys increase, and every team member, regardless of experience level, can jump into debugging, finding answers much more quickly than before. The pain they were feeling is lifting, but most importantly, now that the team has an observability practice in place, there is a noticeable shift in culture. So now we're going to dig into a little bit more how observability can contribute to a stronger team culture, and we'll still reference back to the team from our story. So we mentioned a shift in culture. The way it shifted was from a knowing culture to a learning culture. What does that mean? In a knowing culture, people are doing the same thing over and over again and know exactly how it's going to go as a result. Confidence is gained from repetition. In a learning culture, it's more common to do things you haven't done before, but with the confidence that you can observe and measure how it's behaving and adjust as needed. Work in learning cultures is approached much more like a bunch of little experiments. Like observability, there are a lot of definitions of culture of learning or learning culture floating around, but this one is my favorite. A mindset within an organization where learning and improvement are at the heart of how people prioritize their time, do their jobs, and interact with one another. In the book Accelerate, which is a fantastic book about high-performing teams and the behaviors that separate high-performing teams and low-performing teams, it is stated in the section on organizational culture and identity that the best thing you can do for your products, your company, and your people is institute a culture of experimentation and learning. And observability is a practice that will help you do that. So I want to share some qualities that are core to a culture of learning and how practicing observability contributes to building these qualities on engineering teams, as well as other things teams can do outside of observability that exhibit these same qualities that will strengthen your team. First, we have make learning habitual. Like I mentioned earlier in the talk, a really important part of implementing an observability practice is baking it into the processes that work for the team. The Avengers made sure that asking how to observe a feature was part of their code review process, as well as actually going and observing it post-merge. It became a habit within the lifecycle of a feature, and it allowed the engineers to make any necessary adjustments before calling a feature done and shifting their focus to something new. This is one example of learning being habitual, but it can be habitual in other ways too, such as normalizing sharing what you've learned when you make a mistake or a faulty deployment occurs with the rest of your team instead of trying to pretend like it didn't happen. Reward curiosity. Good observability tooling does this by ensuring information is at your fingertips, and every time you ask a question of your system, you're quickly rewarded with information and being at least one step closer to an answer or a solution. Other ways this can be modeled on engineering teams is engineers of all levels being comfortable admitting when they don't know things, asking questions, and initiating experiments. This behavior can go a long way in shaping junior engineers to see people who have been promoted and climbed the ladder to senior, staff, and principal levels still have that curiosity to ask questions and learn rather than act like they have all the answers. Value progress over perfection. Rewarding and valuing progress is a great way to encourage learning. Without being trapped by the rigidness of perfection, a team can be much more exploratory and take risks that can lead to really big wins. The practice of observability demonstrates progress because you don't need to know every attribute that you want to track up front. It's a journey. You start with the attributes you think your future self will want to know about, but if in the middle of solving a problem, you wish you had access to a couple of other attributes or you notice a function call doesn't have a span associated with it, you can add them. As you and your team practice observability, you'll get better at it, and your system will become more and more observable over time. This quality can also be shown through size of deploys. Earlier, when talking about the standards the Avengers agreed to, one of them was small, frequent deploys. Being able to sense when your code adds value and merge it, rather than waiting until it is perfectly baked and matches your vision exactly, is a superpower. And finally, we have make learning social. Learning should be something that your team can do together. This manifests through observability in having links to interesting graphs and queries to share, so problem solving and debugging can truly become a team sport. With this capability, even remote teams can look over each other's metaphorical shoulders and build on what their teammates have discovered to reach a solution quickly. Outside of observability, having lunch and learns and hack weeks can be great ways to socialize learning on your engineering team. Hopefully, seeing these commonalities between learning culture and observability starts to show how practicing observability improves your team's learning culture. And because it impacts team culture, every member of an engineering team stands to benefit from observability. To showcase this a bit further, I want to highlight a few different archetypes on the engineering team from our story and talk about how they each benefited from this journey the team has gone on. First, we have Michael. He is a senior engineer who has been recruited to join the Avengers. He has quite a bit of experience coding and working on systems, but he hasn't worked on a team with a strong observability practice before. He's pretty new to the concept in general. What he noticed through his onboarding process is that he's able to get up to speed faster than usual. Having a tool where he can see traces, how services interact, and the schema of the system helps him assemble a mental model so he can begin contributing. Having fresh eyes on system telemetry data also means he can point out things that don't make sense to him, but the rest of the team already sees as normal, and solve bugs with only a couple weeks on the team under his belt. He's also able to work on different parts of the system with relative ease, using the telemetry data as a compass to get himself oriented and understand the attributes that are important and the general flow of information through the system. As he onboards to this new way of working, he also learns to share context with his team members by instrumenting his own code, so anyone on the team can understand what's going on when it breaks, not just him. Next, we have Brittany. She is a mid-level engineer who is eager to learn and level up in her software engineering career. She was on the team prior to the push for observability, and once distributed tracing was added and she learned how to explore the data in Honeycomb, she felt far more empowered to jump into investigating bugs and outages. She used to only feel helpful troubleshooting problems that she recognized and had experienced before, but now with observability tooling in place, she also feels helpful figuring out brand new errors as well. As a result of jumping into solving so many new problems, she is able to level up in her career faster than she would have on a team with no observability practice, because she wouldn't have had the confidence or the right tooling to solve those same problems. She is able to gain context and learn from senior engineers like Michael through the instrumentation they place in their code. Then there's Tony. He's been brought onto the team as an apprentice after teaching himself to code for several months. He will be on the team for 6 months to learn how to be a software engineer and launch his career in tech. He has a lot to learn, and while how to instrument code and the jargon around observability still feels a bit confusing and overwhelming to him, he's still able to reap the benefits of the instrumentation the team has put in place. He was chosen as an apprentice because of the curiosity he exhibited, and Honeycomb is the perfect place for him to ask endless questions to learn and satisfy that curiosity. He feels like it's the Stack Overflow of the actual system he's working on, and loves having a visual way to understand how data flows through the system. Not to mention, he has a place to independently ask questions and be curious, on top of also having senior engineers around to ask questions of. He doesn't think he would have been able to ramp up on the system as thoroughly or effectively if he was left to shuffle through only CloudWatch logs to figure out how things worked. The impact of a team having a strong observability practice doesn't necessarily stop with that team. In bigger organizations where not all teams have the same standards and tool sets, one team's telemetry data can also benefit other dependent teams. In the case of our story, the Avengers built a connected device platform, so any teams building mobile apps or firmware on top of that platform stand to benefit from insights into how the platform is behaving. So the final archetype we will talk about today is an engineer on a neighboring team, the Guardians. Their team is building an app that sends data to the Avengers platform, and they haven't yet gone on their own observability journey. One of the features of the platform is to validate incoming data and reject it if it's outside of the boundaries agreed on by the two teams. To help the Guardians understand what is wrong with the data they've sent that has been rejected, the Avengers provide them with a developer dashboard that shows a table of relevant telemetry data that hit the platform so the Guardians can have a quicker feedback loop and efficiently fix their data problems. Having this data as a common language between the two teams also helps communication about problems in the system go much more smoothly because it becomes less of a blame game with the conversation rooted in data to show clearly where the problem lies. The Guardians are also able to learn observability implementation tips from the Avengers, so they can get more visibility into how their app is operating and potentially even connect their client-side requests to the platform requests for an even fuller trace. So this brings me to the end of our story about the Avengers platform engineering team and their observability adoption. They were able to learn and grow and successfully meet the business goals they set out to achieve, in large part because they had an observability practice to help them both with solving technical problems and fostering a strong, curious team. A few takeaways are that the foundation of an observability practice is structured events. Buying a tool is not observability. Observability becomes a superpower when it is successfully embedded as a practice into existing team processes. And observability benefits every engineer on the team, and possibly even engineers outside the team, not just the most senior engineers. Thank you again for coming to my talk. You can sometimes find me on Twitter, and I will be around all week, and I'm happy to chat, and I will also be hanging out in the Slack channel for the talk, and happy to chat there as well.
Awesome, thank you.